Hello and welcome to On the Way Moments, a podcast from St. Anthony on the Desert Episcopal Church here in Scottsdale, Arizona. On this podcast, we hear stories from some very interesting people and their on the way moments that they experience through their lives. I'm Will Strong, your host today. And on today's episode, we have a person with an amazing story that you'll just want to hear. Catherine Gilbert serves as the director of the ministry of Walking the Mourner's Path, which is a national grief ministry that is based at St. Anthony on the Desert. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you, Will. It's great to be here.
Nice to have you.
It's good.
So just to kind of, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick overview of what Walking the Mourner's Path is.
Walking the Mourner's Path is a national grief ministry that is Christian-based. We partner with faith communities around the country to offer an 8-week program, which is the heart of the ministry. What's really unique about the program is that it's workshop-based, so people are really working on their grief, and we are very intentional about using that word work, because grief is hard, and to be able to have a safe place to work on your grief with people who aren't just caring about you, but also trained. We train all our facilitators and clergy people so that when you come into a Walking Mourner's Path group, workshop, you are in a safe place where you can be accepted and loved. And it's centered with Christ, because through God's presence, we heal. And it's just miraculous to be a part of the workshops and the ministry.
And how long has Walking the Mourner's Path been going?
We are in our 26th year.
Wow.
And St. Anthony's owned the program for 15 of those
Wow.
years.
That's great.
So it's pretty exciting.
That's wonderful. And have you been the director since day one?
I have not.
Oh, okay.
I always
didn't know if that was true. I didn't know.
No, I have not. I was asked to work on the ministry, take a 1-year commitment, and I'm in my 12th year of my 1-year commitment. And it talks about the power of the ministry, and I found that I had a passion for it. It's kind of weird to say I have a passion for grief, which isn't really true. I have a passion for the ministry, for pastoral care,
and for the healing part that comes.
Oh, it's just amazing the work that people do, and to be centered in a place where Christ is palpable, and that love is just incredible. And I'm always amazed every time I sit in a workshop or I do a training. I'm amazed at the power of the program and the power of God's presence in that ministry.
Awesome. Nice. So looking back over the 12 years as you started the process, what's something that may have surprised you?
I think I was most surprised about is how poorly we grieve as a culture, and in churches, even in church communities, because we do funerals well. We do that beginning rituals. You'll have a clergy person present if you wish at the deathbed. We have a beautiful, in Episcopal Church and many other mainline Protestant churches, we have beautiful rituals around death. We have the casserole brigades where people are caring for people, but that's just in the immediacy of the death. But once we get beyond those, where people are still suffering, still needing help, there's nothing. And that's where Walking the Mourner's Path has filled that void. And Walking the Mourner's Path was founded on that question: where is Christ in my pain? And so it's really remarkable to see that work. And I'm just surprised how much we focus on the immediacy and don't talk about death, about mourning, and about grieving. And we all experience it.
Right. And that's a really good point, because it's like, well, here's a day off. Good luck at your grief. You know.
I call it the 3-day rule, actually, where you have, you're allowed 3 days to attend the funeral, and then you're supposed to come back to work and pretend like nothing happened. And that's how we normally do it as a culture.
And grief is so different for everybody.
Yeah, it's going to depend on that relationship you have with a loved one. And I know we're going to jump into what that pandemic has certainly affected the way we grieve and mourn. Can I jump right into that?
I was going to say, actually, please do, yes.
So what the pandemic has done is it's separated us from those very rituals that we talked about. And even though they're not quite enough, they're still really important to begin the grieving process. Having those opportunities for storytelling. If you even think about how the Bible is formed, it's through storytelling. And when we storytell together, it's a process that begins our grieving, allows us to heal when we tell those stories, when we talk about. But the pandemic has caused us to be isolated.
Absolutely.
And even if you're in this kind of two-dimensional world that Zoom creates, like we did a Zoom funeral for a family, and it was like, okay, Well, that was missing a lot because you can't
Yeah.
touch, you can't hug, you can't see the expression like you do in a one-on-one
Absolutely.
conversation. And you're already experiencing a lot of loss.
Yeah.
We've lost our autonomy in many ways. We've lost those connections we have. And even something as simple as like, say you went to the gym.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't do that. You couldn't do that
can't do
anymore.
that. You couldn't do that. Yep.
anymore. And so the pandemic has really isolated people more than even before. We weren't grieving well anyway.
Right.
And then we've added this whole new layer. And we also have to talk about people who've died from the pandemic. You know, when we first started talking about the pandemic, I was shocked by the people who were using the words only. Only so many people died. Well, now we're at 600,000.
Only. Like what?
And you just go, how can you talk about that?
Those are souls, yeah.
Yes, each person. I got really mad on a Facebook post. I go, what? That's like somebody's grandma who made the best chocolate chip cookies.
Absolutely.
That is somebody who mattered.
Yep.
And we're talking about, we just got so caught up in this kind of political sized disease, deadly disease. And so when people see that, and the other piece is if with COVID or any other disease or sickness where they were in the hospital, they died alone.
Absolutely.
They may have had, if they died of COVID, they were surrounded by people in protective agreement from head to toe, or they weren't allowed, your loved one wasn't allowed to be there to say those final dying words with an opportunity. And then there's this whole other layer like, okay, my loved one died, but I'm here.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was nothing I could do to be with them. I mean, that's talk about bad death.
Or how did they die and I didn't?
Absolutely. It's that survivor's.
Right. Survivor's guilt is just huge. And there's just so many layers there where we haven't we don't talk about death.
No.
And then you add this layer of separation and isolation, all those things that get you gradually through it. It's been a really difficult year. And think about everything else you lost.
Right.
You
Absolutely.
you may have lost your job. And so now you're stuck with a financial consideration and you're dealing with somebody who died.
Yep.
It's
like grief on grief on grief.
Right.
And how do we... And so during the pandemic, I mean, were you able to have groups? I mean, you don't want to Zoom groups with people that you don't necessarily know.
Right. A couple churches were able to offer groups via Zoom. And with mixed results. Some of them had really great groups because they already had a community.
Prior.
And they already knew people. For others, they were able to reach out to a broader community, so that worked. But we here at St. Anthony kind of made this decision. Well, we did make this decision that we're not going to do groups and not be able to sit in the room because, as I talked about earlier, one of the really magic moment in the groups is the presence of the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely.
And feeling it.
Yes.
And you can't feel the Holy Spirit
Do you feel
on Zoom.
Over there at 24 Smith Street there.
You can't feel it. And so and the other part of that, as facilitators, we're doing a lot of active listening to help people to point out things they may not see in themselves. And it's really hard to active listening when you're doing a Zoom call. I've tried it. It's hard.
You got the dog barking. You got everything in the background, and it's just that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's so. Kind of thinking, hopefully we are on the up and up of reopening life and everything. How does that play a part back into?
Well, I think what's really is going to happen is as we reemerge in the world, that person's going to be missing. If you experience the death of someone and all of a sudden you're gathering as a family, you're doing all those things, I call it the empty chair at the table, where that person isn't there anymore.
Yeah.
And they were a big part of your life, of your family, of your social group, and they're not anymore. So they're going to be lost. They're going to be missed. And we have to give ourselves grace to say, I might have to take a step back. Even if I've done a job of working on my grief and doing the tasks, we might take a step back as we reemerge into the world. Yeah. And then there's there seems to be an abundance of unkindness in the world. Where you see people just being angry with one another. Yeah. And can you imagine you've experienced the death of someone, you're just reemerging, and all of a sudden you've got somebody going, well, that COVID thing isn't real, or, any other number of things. And you go, wow, a little bit of kindness could go a long way here. And so I just think that's going to be really difficult as we go
kindness,
back.
For sure. I mean, it's something so trivial. not trivial, but so minute, you'd think, just to be
Well,
like,
it's
how
just
are you feeling?
right. Well, just
Yeah.
being kind to that other person you're
Right.
engaging with, because you don't know what their story is, what path they're walking, what they've been through in the last year. Just to now that you've maybe taken off your mask or smile with your eyes,
Smile,
whether you ever
right?
ask, just be kind to one another. There's no need to. So your day isn't going well.
Right.
Well, their day might not be going well either. They might not be. And, the other thing I'm going to step out here and say, let's not talk about COVID and shroud it in politics anymore.
Right.
Let's talk about it being something that we all lived through and that people died from and that it mattered. It mattered. And that, yes, we're going to reemerge and we should be excited about it. But there's not going to be, we've talked about it here at St. Anthony, normal isn't going to happen
Oh,
anymore.
no. Normal is gone.
Yeah, it's going to be a new way of approaching things and recognizing that we're going to be going out in the world with people who we don't know the burdens they're carrying.
Absolutely. And I think this, one of the kind of silver linings of that pandemic is that maybe this does bring a kindness. Maybe this does bring a, man, we all just went through this together and I don't know what you lost or what you gained or anything during the pandemic, but you know what, I can smile, I can be nice, I can ask you how you're doing, because we've all experienced and seen what this past year has been like. And so I mean, it sounds like we need a COVID edition for Mourner's Path.
Well, I think just gradually, one of the great things about Mourner's Path is those tools can be used throughout your life.
Absolutely.
Those are life skills that we don't necessarily have in our toolbox. I always like to say, one of the things about grief and mourning is we don't have that in our toolbox. We don't, since we haven't talked about grief and mourning, especially children often are separated from death. Is they haven't seen what mourning looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they have no patterns to model you. So we have no patterns. We have nothing in our toolbox to pull on. So maybe now we're going to begin to have a conversation or we're just going to shove it all aside and go on in life.
There's the rug, put it under there, we'll move along. Yeah. And it makes me think of, Brene Brown talks a lot about vulnerability and that kind of that grief and we have to be vulnerable to grieve.
Right.
And that is a huge part in our life. And so I think offering that kindness and offering that, but also being vulnerable yourself.
Right. Giving yourself some grace.
That's a huge part of the work that you guys do with Mourner's Path is, we have to get through the stuff, the mud before we come up and out of that and before we hit the clear water. So, well, Catherine, how can people find out more about it?
Before I end,
please.
I do want to say something. If somebody is really experiencing grief, there's complicated grief, seek a mental health professional.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because you don't need to do this alone. There are people out there who can help you and walk you through it and walk with you, who are trained in this grieving process and can walk you through it. And just like you would go to the doctor if you're sick, your mental health is equally as important.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up because it's, I think we sometimes forget. Not even forget, but we just don't talk about it as much.
No, we don't.
And that is something that we have to do. We have to do our mental health checks and go talk to somebody. And so, like Catherine said, if you need help, reach out to somebody and a licensed counselor or psychologist or that. So
and if you're in a faith community, clergy people are often connected to mental health professionals who can connect you with somebody. And what's great about having clergy people, they have some skill set. They not only know what their capabilities, they also know what their limitations are. And so they can refer you to someone often.
And so does that happen in Mourner's Path then quite a bit?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Good. Well, that's great. So one of the things that we do like to talk about, I'll ask all of our guests, is sharing an on-the-way moment of something. It doesn't have to do with Mourner's Path. More than well it could, but something that in your life that maybe has kind of shifted your life that you think was meaningful.
Well, Mourner's Path.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just I went in thinking I was going to do the business side of it and make it all.
I got 1 year.
I got it all. I'll straighten it out. We'll make sure the program's updated and we'll do all this. And, just what I always like to say is, how can you do this for so long? Is I have the pleasure of seeing the light of Christ illuminated in people who've seen only darkness.
Oh, I love that.
And it is a privilege to sit with people in those moments.
And a hard privilege too. Yeah, you just got some too. Yeah, and that's a hard
bumps,
privilege to have to carry. But
No, but it's, we often say that, there's a lot of pain that is shared in a Mourner's Path workshop, but there's a lot more laughter. There's a lot more caring. There's a lot more. Our tagline is, our mission is transforming grief into joyful living.
Oh, there you go.
And so there's joy at the end of this. We're not healed all the way, but there's joy.
There's joy. I like that. Choose joy too.
Yeah.
Move towards that joy. So how can people find out about Walking the Mourner's
Well,
Path?
we have a website, www.mournerspath.com.
Okay.
And if you go to the St. Anthony website, there's a link there too.
Perfect. And we'll put that in the show notes for all of you to find out. So I just want to say a great big thank you to Catherine today.
Thank you.
That's it for today. If you like today's episode, give us a thumbs up or leave a comment on YouTube or wherever you hear your podcasts. Until next time, be on the lookout for your own on the way moments. Bye for now.